He's the president of Vaccine Choice Canada. He's a retired psychotherapist. He's the author of 2 books, Peace Begins With Me, How Can I Wake Up When I Don't Know I'm Asleep, and Dare to Question, and that's one parent to another. Ted's journey to examine the claims of the vaccine industry began after his son Joshua was neurologically injured by the diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus vaccine, DPT, in 1984. Joshua passed away on February 16, 2017, after a life of uncontrolled seizures and the admonished capacity due to vaccine-induced neurological injury. Ted believes the organized and intentional effort to deny citizens their right to make medical decisions for themselves and their children is one of the greatest threats to humanity today. If we lose the capacity for choice over what is injected into ourselves and our children, then we are no longer free citizens. Protecting medical choice and demanding honesty, transparency, and accountability are the most important issues in Ted's life today. I want everyone to give a very large welcome to Mr. Ted Kuntz.
Good morning. I want to say, first of all, thank you for being here. You're part of the solution. We're told that there's a second wave coming, and I suggest we're the second wave. And they want us to be afraid of this novel virus, but I think they're more afraid of us. Many of you weren't here early this morning when the police showed up and the park ranger who wanted us to leave. They're threatened by people coming together and talking. It's dangerous, you know. Now they say it's for the greater good, it's for our health, but it's not. This is a massive social control experiment that we're participating in against our wishes. This is not about our health. They don't care about our health. What they care about is control. They want to see who will comply. They've put us like frogs in boiling water, and they've raised the temperature gradually to see what we'll do. And what I'm delighted to see is that there are many of you here that recognize the fraud and have the courage to stand up to it, because we have to. They're not going to step down nicely. They're not going to step down because we write emails to our Prime Minister and to Theresa Tam and to Bonnie Henry saying, please stop oppressing us. People have asked me, Ted, do you think they'll come out with a COVID vaccine? And my answer is absolutely. Do you think it will be safe and effective? No, but that doesn't matter. There is far too much capital and there's far too much political investment in this vaccine for them not to come out with something. The other question I get asked all the time is, will it be mandatory? Well, it's a play on words. They may not make it legally mandatory, but you can bet they'll make it as difficult as possible for you to live your life without it. It might as well be mandatory. We're up against a cabal that is dangerous, very dangerous. And this didn't start 6 months ago. It didn't start 10 years ago. They have been planning this for hundreds of years, most especially in the last decades. This is about capturing us. It's about taking away our rights and freedoms. It's about giving up our sovereignty. It's about complying. It's about obedience. And I'm delighted to see that all of you here are not obedient. Now, the media would make us out to be selfish. We're selfish for not wearing a mask. We're selfish for not agreeing to take a COVID vaccine. We're selfish for not distancing 6 feet. And I'll admit that I am. But it's not because I couldn't do all those things. It's that I won't do those things. And the reason I won't do those things is because I see something else going on here. I'm seeing the systemic violation, the systemic erosion, the denial of our rights and freedoms, and I feel a responsibility to stand up to that. I want to be able to say to my grandchildren when they ask, where were you when they took away our rights and freedoms? And I want to say I was here trying to stop it. I was hoping that police officer would actually issue me a ticket this morning, the $200 fine that Mike Farnworth is threatening us with. Because I know Mike too. I voted for him as a city councilor in Port Coquitlam. Because I wanted to frame that. I wanted to have evidence that I stood up to the tyranny that's going on. You know, my 6-year-old granddaughter came to visit us a few weeks ago, and I was very busy doing the things that we're doing with Vaccine Choice Canada. And she said, Papa, what are you doing? And I didn't know what to say to her, but I said, you know what, Aria, I'm trying to save the world. And this little girl looked at me with these big eyes, and she said, wow, Papa, you must be a superhero. And we all need to be superheroes right now. This is a very difficult time. They want to intimidate us. The epidemic that's on this planet is not a novel virus. The epidemic is fear. And they use fear to shut us down, to control us. You know, I listened to all of the information that David shared with us. Important information. I agree with everything that David said. He's very well researched, and we're fortunate to have somebody as informed as David. But I also know the audience that we need to reach cannot hear us. They cannot hear the facts. They've been captured by a narrative, and they insist on going along with that narrative, and I get it. When you finally realized that we have been massively deceived, it wounds the heart deeply. It wounds our soul. To realize that our government is not acting in our best interest, to realize that our media is intentionally lying to us, to realize that our medical system is not about our health, are very difficult realities to come to know. Those of us with Vaccine Choice Canada are mostly parents who in one way or another lost our children to that medical practice. And it took a long time for me to realize that the medical industry took away my son. Part of it was hard for me to admit that I didn't do my homework as a parent. That I accepted what they had on faith, that I was blinded by my trust in that profession. But they did harm my son. They killed my son. And it hurts to know that I participated in that because I wasn't responsible, because I didn't do my homework, I didn't ask enough questions. I love that David asked questions. That's how we begin to think. I've spent 30 years researching the vaccine literature, and I came to the realization that what they tell us the science says and what the science actually says is two different things. I spent 30 years reading the science, pulling together, compiling it, putting it into boxes. I have a library of books. It has become my mission in life is to understand what the truth is. But if people don't ask questions, they can't hear it. And that's why I titled my book, Dare to Question, because we have to begin with a question. Are we being told the truth? What is the evidence behind all of these COVID measures? I drafted a letter to Bonnie Henry, to Adrian Dix, to our Premier, and it had 26 questions that I wanted the answers to. Everything from what's the mathematical modeling they're using? Are they counting the negative consequences of their measures on the impact on our economy, on our families, on our health, on our psychological well-being? What's the evidence for 6 meters or 6 feet as opposed to 3 feet? Do you know that the World Health Organization only recommends 3 feet? Many countries around the world, they only have 3 to 4 feet. Why do we have 6 feet in Canada? I wanted to know, what they're relying on. What's the evidence? When they started to impose masking, show me the evidence. I want the science. I don't want an opinion, I want the science. They responded eventually, and they didn't answer one of the questions. And I wrote them back and I said, if this was a high school science examination, you would have got an F. I also wrote a letter to the House of Commons COVID Committee asking the same questions. And I got an email back from the clerk for the committee saying, thank you very much, Mr. Kuntz, and I'm going to forward this to all of the members of the committee. And then half an hour later, she emailed me again, and she apologized, and she said, I'm sorry, Mr. Kuntz, but I'm told that the committee won't accept submissions from the public. This is our so-called democracy. It's a lie. And again, it hurts when we start to see through the lie. This is the Wizard of Oz. We're pulling back the curtain, and we see that it's a lot of smoke and mirrors, and it's not true. And it's money. So I get it, why so many people can't see what's going on. It's too hard to see. That's why it's important that all of you do what you're doing, is standing up for freedom, speaking truth to power, being an example of not living in fear. I don't know if you saw the Angus Reid poll that was done. It was released a week ago, and it divided Canadians up into 3 categories. The first category they called infection fighters. And those infection fighters are vigilant about masking. They maintain 6 feet distance religiously. They have not hugged since March. The poll also indicated that they were the least happy of the group. The second group they called inconsistent. Sometimes they mask, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they 6 foot distance, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they hug, sometimes they don't. I suspect they do what's easy. And then the third group, which I suspect all of you are, do you know what they called us? Cynic spreaders. So I just want to acknowledge all of you cynic spreaders. But I want to make sure you know what you've been called. Do you know what a cynic is? I looked it up just to make sure I understood what I was being called. So let me tell you what it says in the dictionary. A cynic is one of a sect of Greek philosophers, 4th century BC, who advocated the doctrine that virtue is the only good, and that the essence of virtue is self-control, and that surrender to any external influence is beneath human dignity. So I'm proudly a cynic. So what are we going to do? You know, we could go into despair, but that simply buys into the notion that they have power over us, and they don't. When we stand up, the game falls away, and so it's important that we stand up. But we have to be thoughtful about how we stand up. We have to stand up with wisdom, with compassion, with love. If we engage in this battle out of fear, then they've won. We have to be strong in our position. We have to know that we're coming from a place of truth and a place of love. And we can do that. We can be an example of the kind of world we want to live in. And so when I go into those stores and I'm not wearing a mask, I smile, I look at people, I say good morning to them. I don't need to fight with anybody. I believe that my way of being in the world is more powerful than anything I might say. We're human beings, not human doings, and so we need to pay attention to our way of being. The other thing we're doing, and I'm sure all of you are aware, is that at Vaccine Choice Canada, we've launched a legal challenge against the Government of Canada. Now, I have to tell you that was a hard decision for our board of directors. We're mostly mums and dads whose children have been injured and killed by vaccines. Our mandate since 1982, Vaccine Choice Canada, in some form or another, has been around since 1982, trying to protect our right to informed consent, our right to medical choice, the right of parents to make medical decisions for their children. All of that is under threat. Our big moment came last fall when we decided it was time to take on the Ontario government. The Ontario government has been violating our right to informed consent in Ontario since 1982. They introduced legislation, the first in Canada, to make vaccination mandatory for public school attendance. The initial legislation did not include any exemptions. And a group of parents said that was unacceptable. They lobbied government for 2 years, and in 1984, they were able to get a change in legislation to include the right to personal and religious exemptions, the right to personal and conscious choice. And so that was an important win. The only other province in Canada, by the way, that has legislation that requires vaccination is New Brunswick. And again, they have exemptions. And so the truth is that vaccines in Canada is 100% voluntary, but most people aren't told that because the media intentionally misleads that. But what happened in Ontario is they added to their coercion. They insisted that parents who didn't vaccinate their child with every single vaccine, if they skipped even one, they had to attend a mandatory education session. Does that sound like communism? And you had to sign an affidavit that said you are knowingly putting your child's life at risk. And we felt that was unacceptable. So last fall, we hired Rocco Galati and asked if he would take on the Ontario government, and he agreed. And we stood in front of the legislature in Ontario in October and announced that we were going to hold an evidence-based discussion in a court of law. We were going to make the government prove their case in a court of law. And I think they were terrified. and they should be. Because as you heard from David, none of this is evidence-based. This is a massive fraud. When all of this COVID nonsense began in February and March, we were inundated with requests from Canadians, would we please launch a legal action against the Canadian government? And we thought we weren't the right organization to do that. We thought this was bigger than simply vaccination. The media had done such a masterful job of discrediting us that we thought for Vaccine Choice Canada to take on that legal challenge probably wasn't the wisest course of action. But we didn't see anybody else standing up. And so we had another conversation with Rocco and said, would you be willing to take that one on? And he said yes. And so on July 6th, in Toronto, we announced our legal challenge against the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, the City of Toronto, half a dozen chief medical officers, many municipalities, and the Canadian Broadcast Corporation. We held a press conference in Toronto on July the 9th. We invited over 110 mainstream media organizations to attend. And guess how many attended? None. Probably the most important action in Canada at this time, and not one mainstream media felt it was important enough to report it. The CBC woke up about 2 weeks ago and said, oh, they finally saw the statement of claim. Well, it had been delivered to their lawyers on July the 6th, but I guess they didn't share it with anybody at the CBC. Rocco has met with the lawyers for the defense already. There are more than 15 lawyers representing their side. And he fully expects that they will try to have the case dismissed, saying it doesn't have merit. And he said, well, my first response would be, if it has no merit, why do you need 15 lawyers? But we will go forward. Rocco has advised us to expect 3 court cases. This one is launched in the Superior Court of Ontario. He said, win or lose, we're going to go to the Supreme Court of Ontario. Win or lose, we're going to go to the Supreme Court of Canada. Now, this is not a quick remedy. It could take 3 to 5 years for that to happen. But our intention was to send a very strong message that we will take them to court. We will hold them accountable. And we saw that happen in New Brunswick. Last year, New Brunswick introduced legislation to remove the personal and religious exemptions in that province. They invited 3 days of hearings, and so Vaccine Choice Canada showed up at those hearings, and we invited 6 medical experts from around the world to attend as well. And each of us got to speak for 30 minutes, which is unheard of for most governments. Typically, they give you 5 minutes, pat you on the head, and send you on your way. When they asked me, I spoke at that hearing, if our organization would take them to court if they proceeded with their legislation. I said absolutely. And so the New Brunswick government heard that, and they withdrew the legislation, but they introduced it 2 weeks later with a new clause to it. They said that they would use the notwithstanding clause from the charter. And basically the notwithstanding clause says, I acknowledge that what we're doing is a violation of your charter rights and freedoms, but we're going to do it anyways. The good news is that about a month ago, the legislature in New Brunswick finally voted on that bill, and it was defeated. But I have no illusions, the battle's not over. That was just a little skirmish. They're after our rights and freedoms. They want to turn us into cattle. They want to have complete control over what gets injected into our bodies. They don't like that we have the right to informed consent. They don't like that we have bodily sovereignty. And this is our government, this is our medical industry, this is our mainstream media that is attacking us. It's time to stand up. My assessment is that many of us in Canada are naive. We've not experienced tyranny like this before. Other places in the world have, Europe has, Germany has, Russia has, Italy has. But we've not seen it here. And so many people that I talk to think that I'm overreacting. They think I'm making things up. And I ask them if they're aware of what's happening in Australia and New Zealand. In New Zealand now, they can knock on your door without a warrant, they can go inside, they can test everybody, and if there's somebody who's been tested positive, they can take them out of the home, even if it's a child. They have suspended all rights and freedoms. And if we don't think that can come here, it can. Our Health Minister, Adrian Dix, had a Zoom conference in Kelowna here on Thursday. I don't know if any of you were involved in that call. I registered to be part of that call. I had 3 questions that I put together that I wanted to ask our Health Minister. And when it came time to go onto the call, I sat in the waiting room of the Zoom for 10 minutes before it kicked me out. It timed out. So I re-registered again. I sat in the waiting room again for another 10 minutes before I got kicked out, timed out. I suspect they did not want me to ask a question of our Health Minister. And my questions were, is he aware of what's happening in Australia and New Zealand? Is he concerned about that? And can he reassure British Columbians that that will never happen here? That was my first question. The second one was, since they've never isolated the SARS-CoV-2 virus, they've never purified it, and they've never proved scientifically that it causes the condition we call COVID-19, what are they actually testing for? And what possibly are they going to put into a vaccine, given they've never isolated the virus? And my final question was, how bad does it have to get in British Columbia? How many deaths do we have to have of people who commit suicide, people who have lost their jobs, people who have gone bankrupt, families that have come apart, before he recognizes that the response of government is worse than this so-called novel virus? But I suspect he wouldn't have wanted to answer those questions. They don't seem to want to answer questions. But it's up to us to keep holding them accountable. It's up to us to be defenders of the rights and freedoms. It was interesting for me to listen closely as we all sang "O Canada" at the start of this. And it's about the land of the free, standing up for freedom. If that's not part of Canada, then we're not in Canada any longer. Right. What I see is that none of their measures take into consideration rights and freedoms. It doesn't take into consideration informed consent. It doesn't take into consideration bodily sovereignty. It doesn't take into consideration the right of parents to make decisions for their children. When a government is imposing measures that don't take those incredibly foundational core values into consideration, then I'd say we're in tyranny. So we need to speak with our voices. We need to speak with our choices. We need to insist that our rights and freedoms are honored and respected. We need to resist. If we comply, we're inviting the tyranny. John F. Kennedy said 50 years ago, what's the point in surviving if our rights and freedoms don't survive with us? And I think we have that same question today. What I'm grateful for all of you is that you're awake, you're courageous, you're cynical spreaders, and together we will be the second wave. Thank you all.